Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Leftology podcast. I'm your host, Cameron.
I'm Patrick, and we were originally planning on moving the episodes to bi-weekly, trying to do it every 2 weeks, but then this week America decided to have a major historical event where, fueled by Fox News and Trump, a bunch of, what do you want to call them, neo-Nazis?
I guess it'd be your Maga people. I wouldn't say Fox News directly because I don't know if they were spreading like the January 6th thing exactly. And I
I
don't want to
see.
I don't want my podcast with 50 followers on YouTube to be hit with a slander thing. But I put it in my notes because like we actually put notes down for this episode because we wanted to seem like we knew what we talked about. So like if you look in the long run, like Fox News over the last 2 decades, I would say, um, like you have this like right wing propaganda outlet that is like spreading. Uh, the Democrats are always faking the elections in a sense, like they're getting fake voters, dead voters. Your great grandma is voting Democrat, even though that she was a big time racist, because they're just using her like
See,
voter
I
ID
guess the
that
way
doesn't
I see it
exist.
is that, like, even if you weren't pushing people to be at the Capitol on January 6th, if you were like Steven Crowder, who was like pushing the narrative that the election was stolen and that America's being taken over by the communist left and they're gonna like censor you and take away your babies and force feminize them, all the people pushing that narrative are in a way culpable for what happened, because if you genuinely think your country is being overthrown and that your freedoms are going to be taken away, this is just the logical thing to do. Like,
Yeah.
it's completely illogical because it was all based on a conspiracy theory. But if it wasn't a conspiracy, this would be the logical thing to do. And so because of that, I see everyone that knowingly pushed these lies as culpable for what happened.
Definitely. You have different people at different levels of responsibility. Like I was saying earlier, I think Fox News uh, has a level to where they don't really want to lose a bunch of money from a lawsuit, but they can peddle these things that are, I guess, in a court like the Tucker Carlson case, where it was just so outlandish that no one in their right mind should believe that it's true.
But people
Um,
do. But because, like, you could
Tucker's
say that.
probably sorry to interject, but Tucker is probably if anyone on Fox News is culpable for this, it's probably him the most.
Yeah, and it's so bullshit to say like anyone should know Tucker Carlson is satire. I mean, he's like a massive news personality on, like, isn't Fox News the biggest news company in America?
Yeah, because it really is. Or up until like a couple of years ago, when like OAN steps in the picture, it is really the only right wing news network on television.
Yeah, him and like Sean Hannity are massive personalities on like the biggest network in America. How are people supposed to just reasonably think that's satire just because it's crazy?
It's not satire. Um,
But that was their defense in that one case. What was it? Was it Stormy Daniels sued them for lies, and they said, "Well, no one in the right mind would believe what Tucker Carlson says."
I guess it could be their defense, but I don't know to what level they are actually being like satirical. I don't really think they
Oh, I
are
don't think
being.
they're actually being satirical at all. I'm just saying that is their defense, and I think that defense is total
Yeah,
bullshit.
because you have this generation, your baby boomers and your later silent generation, um, that grew up in an era where like your news personalities were supposed to be trusted 100% of the time. Uh, I forget his name at the moment. There's this big one from like the 60s and 70s that a lot of those people just grew up with learning the news. Um, if I remember it later, I'll say.
But yeah, so how do we get here? How did we get to the point where a bunch of, I guess we'll just say MAGA people, because I think it was anywhere from just like misinformed Republicans all the way to like neo Nazis, like that one woman who was giving a speech out front, like quoting Hitler.
Yeah, I don't know exactly who that was. Was that a congressperson? I
Yeah,
thought it was a congressperson.
it was a congresswoman. Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
and
Mike tweeted about it. Let me see if I can find that.
and you had also there were pictures of a bunch of people wearing like anti-Semitic shirts. Like you have that I think it's a Proud Boy shirt because it's a black shirt with a yellow text on it, and it's like the 6MWE, which was like the 6 million was not enough. And then I just saw one on Twitter this morning about like about how they won't replace us. And so largely this was neo-Nazis and a trying to do a fascist takeover. But so how did we get to this point though, which is what I think is the most important part, because I think if we understand that, we're gonna realize that we're not changing anything and that we're just going to lead to this moment again in the future.
Well, it is a response to like what is going on economically. I would say, like, I don't want to be a guy like a bunch of the other lefty people that like are saying like these are disgruntled like working class people. These aren't disgruntled working class people. Most of them, if they are, they're fucking brainwashed, and I don't think we should include them with the other parts of the working classes.
So
Part of the
what do you
leftist
think this
revolution or
is?
whatever we
Because like
want.
I guess I kind of generalized it to be the people that are getting the bottom of the like the short end of the stick when it came to the economic crisis of like lack of access to healthcare and like housing and
Um,
solid jobs. So who do you think it is then?
well, you have to consider that a bunch of these people uh, did get to Washington, D.C. Like, I imagine very
Yeah,
few of
yeah, and
them
there
were
are
in
like
the area.
planes full of like Trump supporters and only
And
Trump
private
supporters
planes,
going in.
too. So, like, a bunch of these are your, like, I guess, petite bourgeois would be the Marxist term for it. Like, your shop owners that might make a couple 100,000 over what Biden's tax plan, at least the proposed
Yeah,
one,
yeah. So it's like
would increase.
it's all like the local shop owners that think their business is being overrun and taken away from them by massive corporations that are
Not even
controlled
that.
by
Like
like the
they only
Democrats.
give a shit about the taxes. These are not people that care about massive corporations overtaking their business. They only
But isn't that a big part of like the right wing conspiracy? It is like the massive corporations trying to control everything, and
well,
the massive corporations are backed by like the
from
Democrats.
what I see, most of them are only really concerned about massive corporations when it comes to like them not being allowed to say the N word on Twitter, and some similar things to that. Like a big tech is only a problem because they banned their Twitter profiles or their Instagram profiles, and they can't interact with the one thing they've gotten addicted to.
See,
That's really it because a lot of these people are so into capitalist realism that they believe that this system is the only possible one.
so
And
do
if
you
you don't know
th-
what that term is, read Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher if you have the time. It's a great book.
so you don't think it's like the working class people who've been like convinced that like Mexicans are taking their job or something? You think
Uh,
it's more
I would
like
imagine that
petite
those
bourgeois?
exist, but I don't think that that's the majority of them. A lot of these people are people who at least used to like to LARP online about like killing Nancy Pelosi or whatever, which I
See
am not
that is
endorsing.
interesting because I think like, and I think we might have all done it because it's kind of like the easy conclusion to come to. But I think a lot of left people were thinking it was the people that are suffering from lack of access to healthcare and like housing and solid jobs. But you're right. If they're able to afford these plane tickets to get out to the Capitol to protest in the middle of the work week, when a lot of these people I'd assume are back at work because they're Republicans and don't really believe the coronavirus is a big deal. But like,
Well, it does matter because America does have a fairly low labor participation rate. So, like, if we're talking about like people online coming, like a lot of these people could still be using like mommy's or daddy's money. So it's really hard to tell what this group of people is made out of. because a lot of them were dressed up in like very LARPy stuff. Um, so one guy was preparing for hostages, from what I've seen.
Yeah, yeah. You had the one guy with like the phone strapped to his chest recording. He was carrying around the zip tie handcuffs, which are like the ones with two zip ties that come together in the middle, and you
Like he
just
would,
pull them both at the same time. Um, and like in full tactical gear, and so it was.
like I would imagine, like I'm not gonna, phew, I guess, make excuses for this group, but I do think there are like varying tiers of what these people were willing to do on Wednesday. Because like I don't
Oh,
think everyone
definitely,
came for
definitely.
the
I
same
think like
purpose.
so. I think a lot of the people, like you could tell, a lot of the people that stormed the Capitol had no plans on actually being in there. Like you had that one picture of the old lady on Twitter that's like just standing there, like looking like she's confused out of her mind, holding a little American flag. The woman in the purple shirt, and then you had people in tactical gear with like zip tie handcuffs, and those people were definitely fully planning on like probably taking Nancy Pelosi and like probably
AOC,
AOC,
yeah,
maybe even Bernie, like hostage.
probably Kamala too.
Yeah, and that's and it is kind of like an extension of like the Gretchen Whitmer thing, because like if there's one thing to remember, this is not the first or last right wing terrorist attack. I mean, they tried to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer what 2 months ago
It's been
around.
a few months before.
It hasn't been. Oh Jesus Christ! It has been like 3 or 4, huh? But this isn't like the first, and it's not gonna be the last time it happens, especially because you have a lot of Republicans that are now denouncing this behavior, and I have some more to say about about Republicans denouncing this behavior, but you have them people that are denouncing this, but you also have like Republicans like Matt Gaetz, Josh Hawley, and Ted Cruz who are continuing to push the conspiracy after they were back in on the floor, and so these wingnuts like that are like just pushing these crazy conspiracies aren't going to go away. They're going to keep pushing people to do crazy acts because they think their government's being taken over by fucking communists that want to like take their speech away.
Yeah, I think the accurate course of action here for people like Matt Gaetz and Ted Cruz is if you know the amendment, the 14th Amendment, uh, it has its main components, which is like the citizenship part in like the first section. But like the third section was meant so that like people in the Confederacy, this is
Couldn't
60.
hold positions again.
Uh, Eventually they did. It's probably wasn't as strong as it could have been. But like people who are in an insurrection or rebellion against the United States government, they cannot hold an office at a state or federal government, and I guess it would probably also include local, unless like the Congress of the United States by a 2/3 vote overrules. So I think this should be applied, but you also have a risk of it being applied because if you have these people that are already going to Washington for stuff like that, this just removing their politicians, even though it is the constitutional thing to do, does have a backlash to it that should be thought of before doing it.
Yeah, does the backlash fuel the conspiracy fire even more?
I would bet so, but the thing is the fire going to be big enough to where it's not worth it anymore to get rid
And
of these politicians.
And also the other side of this that I saw mentioned today, and this goes along with even setting the precedent of taking the president out of power after this, because of the insurrection. And some people are wondering, does it set a bad precedent to punish everyone for an insurrection, considering an insurrection is not necessarily bad? It it can be good. Like this was bad. This was over a conspiracy, but the actions could be good. So are you setting a bad precedent by kind of demonizing the action and not the reason, which is honestly the problem I've had with the way like the media's covered this. Is they focused on the fact that What's bad is the fact that they stormed into the Capitol, and not the reason they stormed into the Capitol was bad.
Well, you also have to consider how they did it too, because a lot of this was pretty aimless. So if you, I really don't want to be put on a watch list, so I'm going to be very careful with my words here. But like if there is somehow in the future a left-wing revolution in the United States,
Which I don't think it'll be. It'll be a
it's not
fascist.
going to
It'll
be
be
soon
another
if there is
fascist
one. If there is one, but the like, I don't think it would be as aimless as that. You don't just go into the Capitol with 30,000 people, maybe.
See, it is really fucking weird how unorganized this thing was, because usually, like, when you look at like the Proud Boys and they're storming the streets and their plan is to get people riled up so they can fight and kill them. Like, that is their plan. Like, they want to go out into the streets and like kill like black people and journalists, you know?
Yeah.
And so it is weird to see this time it being so unorganized, because it is usually like the left that has super unorganized like protests.
Well, it kind of was just like come to Washington on the 6th. That's why you have these different tiers of people, like what they expected, because I imagine some people expected like doing the same thing like the Women's March had after Trump won, or after the day of Trump's inauguration in 2017.
Yeah, and then they just like ended up stumbling into the Capitol building with
Yeah.
and just were there, just not really sure what to do.
Yeah, and then some people were ready to just kill people, honestly. So it was extremely disorganized, and it was like what the plan was probably was at an individual level to like what every single person had. But for like Trump and impeachment, I think it was weird. I've seen videos online. I think it was on Donald Trump Jr.'s like story on one of his social media accounts. But the Trump family and like friends and people, they were having a watch party. So they weren't doing, I think Trump did a speech early on in the day.
Yeah, so Trump did the speech early on in the day, and I'm trying to remember his exact words, because they were like, "We're gonna walk down Pennsylvania Street, beautiful Pennsylvania Street. I love Pennsylvania Street," because he always does that little thing he does.
Yeah.
And then he was like, "We're gonna go up and support the weak Republicans, because the strong ones don't need our help." And so it's one of those things where it's vague enough though that it has plausible deniability. But he almost did kind of incite it there. I
And
don't
this
think it'd be
possibility,
unfair to say.
he was there. You have your other people. Who's the new congressman in the wheelchair?
Madison Cawthorn. Yeah,
Yeah,
he had
he
the video
was,
on Twitter of him wheeling down about how we're going to protect the Constitution.
and then breaks the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, and that was the biggest thing. The reason this happened, the reason why so many people are so riled up, is because of conspiracies pushed by so many politicians, so many news sources and online personalities, is that it fired people up to do the thing that they're supposed to do. I mean, this is what they talk about all the time. You know, we have the Second Amendment to protect against the tyranny of the government. So if you think like a tyrannical government is overthrowing you, of course you're gonna act this way.
I mean, yeah, I think a lot of these people, it is kind of sad because these people have been tricked into what they believe. It is.
Yeah, yeah, and they've been and Democrats, I think, have allowed them to be tricked because of Democrats specifically focusing on. Because here's the thing: people want answers to their problems, and then Democrats only want to focus on these college-educated white people to bring them into the Democratic establishment. To, I don't know, like, did you listen to the last Chapo episode where they're talking about like spending just millions of dollars on failed campaigns just to like give
They
people
talk about that
jobs?
all the time, from what I've seen. Like stuff like the Lincoln Project. It is very it's a very superficial campaign. The Lincoln Project, the way that I can see it, to get off track for a moment, it like these are ads that are attack ads that like a Republican would make, but they only really are for liberals in a sense, because it is it's the attack it's the Republican attack ad on Republicans that a liberal would want to see. Like a Republican wouldn't really be turned much from it, from what I've seen. Like
Yeah.
they're okay ads. They're just the way they're made, the language they use is targeted at a demographic that doesn't really change anyone's opinion. And then you had it where they attacked Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner in the middle of New York City, a Democrat stronghold.
Yeah. And I think like a lot of the Democrat strategy is what has allowed stuff like this to happen, because the fact they are so focused on going for the college educated white people. And a lot of people voted. The most people voted ever. It was 151 million or something like that. Rough math off the top of my head. And there's 375 million people in the country. There's a lot of people that aren't voting because they're disillusioned and they're looking for answers to their problems. And I think that's the reason why the libertarian movement has grown so much, is because people are just kind of sick of the government, because the government doesn't offer any solutions to what's going on.
Well, the way I see it, and I may be wrong, but a lot of you have these people that just want to like be able to drink their coffee and not read the news. And I'm not going to say that these people make a majority of the party, but there's a lot of people that see voting as an end game. Like once you can get enough people to vote, that's it. Joe Biden's in office, I don't have to worry. But a lot of these people always, it is I guess I don't know how to phrase this. It is kind of like a infinite cycle voting is for them. Like there are the liberals, there are the conservatives, and whoever wins is whoever can win the moderates over, and then that repeats every 4 years. So there is no like winning people over permanently. It is always trying to sell something to these people to get them on your side every 4 or so years. And
But it's always focused on people that are already voting, and it never focuses on the people that are disillusioned by the current happenings.
Well, that adds another problem, because a lot of what would get these people not to or to actually start voting would be against the people who fund the Democratic Party's interests, because the Republicans, at least with Trump there, while most of his life he has been a neoliberal and has benefited from it through his real estate and company, he and his like anti-immigration policy and like his more fascist remarks
It's like isolationism policies as well.
He does offer something that isn't the neoliberal order that we have seen over the last 40 years. Whereas the Democratic Party, except for like Bernie Sanders, AOC, and like on the edge, maybe Elizabeth Warren, still represent something not changing. They represent the current. They represent like what's bad with the country right now, or was under like Obama.
Yeah, and I think like what Trump represents and what we need to worry about moving forward is the fact that people in this country have problems, and they have economic issues going on that we need to solve. And the Democrats are refusing to give them solutions. But you have Trump here, and you have like Republicans in general throughout history saying, it's the Mexicans coming to take your jobs. It's poor people trying to live off your money. It's the black people and the hippies like ruining the streets and shit. And so they're not correct solutions. They're completely wrong, but they are saying, here's the problem, here's how we fix it. Oh, look at all these like corrupt Democrats trying to control your life and like seep into your brain and shit. Whereas like Democrats are just kind of like, we're not going to do anything to solve your economic problems, and we're going to bitch at you for being not woke enough or like manspreading or whatever. And that's something that I do want to talk about on a future podcast is how the liberals have bastardized like intersectionality, and how they've focused on like petty problems when it comes to issues with like race and gender. Well, but that's a whole nother thing.
It is a problem, because I've, at least with the more centrist side of the party, the right wing side of the party, There's the like identity politics that I mean, there are good identity politics, there's bad identity politics, but like just focusing on like a couple social issues as like the entirety of the political range, which I believe that both the right wing side of the or the more like centrist side of the party and the more or like pretty much the entirety of the Republican Party participates in this identity politics that focuses on only a couple issues. Um, the Republicans are more, they have their one economic issue of like low taxes, I guess would be the best way to put it. They don't really give a shit about anything else. They just don't want their money going to like poor people because they're racist or they're internalized racist. And then you have the other side of people that are only pro-choice, which I'm also pro-choice. But like it's I'm really trying to watch where I step when I say things because I know I don't want to step on a wrong thing and just cancel myself. um,
Dude, if anyone gets canceled on this podcast, it's gonna be me
oh
first.
yeah,
Because like,
definitely, you're coming first. I've already had to replace the host once now, Pat. uh, like a lot of the stuff the centrist Democrats believe, I do agree with, but it is such a limited view of what politics can be, and a lot of it is absent of a lot of economic issues.
yeah,
So
yeah,
they
because
have
like,
bastardized the intersectionality because it has to consider both parts.
yeah, and that's something I do want to save for a future episode because I have a lot that I've been thinking about on that. Um, but they have kind of abandoned economic issues because they've here's what kind of like I've noticed. It seems like Republicans set the narrative and set what you're supposed to care about, and then Democrats, instead of trying to say, look, you should like this, you should care about this, instead they just kind of follow along, economically speaking, and just they try to do what is most popular and not what is good for their side, it seems.
Like I was saying earlier, a lot of these more like the people like the Nancy Pelosi part of the party, it is they see politics differently than we do. It is kind of a
The hobbyist
competition, I
level.
guess, would be the way that we would see it as like you could win over 100% of the people. You don't have to win these people over by making compromises in the middle all the time. Uh,
Yeah, but Democrats are like, we have full control of like the country right now, and Democrats are still going to be making concessions, it seems.
yeah, but you also have the Supreme Court that is a right wing. What is it?
Extremely right wing right now.
You could put it's 3-6 Republican Democrat with John Roberts normally voting with the liberals on the big issues, I guess. So 4-5 right now on moderate issues, which is
Yeah,
a problem.
so I guess we don't have really have the control that it seems like we do.
Uh, you do in a certain realm, like you can get some things done, but you still have the filibuster might be a problem still. And a lot of the things that Democrats get rid of while they hold the majority bites them in the butt when they get back into being a minority because a lot of those are things that stop the minority party or allow the minorities to I guess stop what the majority wants to do in a sense. So you get these like 2 years of where they have good control over a thing, but they risk it, or they risk having 6 bad years afterwards.
So getting back towards like the insurrection and like what came after it, I kind of want to talk about how like the Overton window is. It feels like to me it's shifting to the right, and the reason why I say that is because so after it happened, a bunch of people came out and like denouncing this far right activity, denouncing like Trump. I saw a lot of people on TikTok because that's really the only place I see liberals at this point. Um, praising people for like taking down their Trump flags. Like this was the last stand. I'm pulling down my Trump flag. I'm burning it. And there's a bunch of people in the comments going like, yes, this is epic. This is character development. You go, girl boss. Um,
Yeah,
It-
like I saw on Twitter, it was like if this is when you got enough courage to denounce Trump, you didn't have much courage in the first
yeah,
place.
it wasn't the like stripping rights from trans people, the plan to take away gay marriage, the cuts to Medicaid, the what is it called? The trade taxes or whatever that hurt the local farmers, and we had to pay out a bunch of subsidies to local farmers that still went voted for Trump. It wasn't the ramping up on executive orders. It wasn't the ramping up the mistreatment of uh, Mexicans at the border. It wasn't the ramping up of drone strike attacks in the Middle East. No, it was the insurrection, the messy insurrection on the Capitol
Yeah.
that was finally like,
Well, it
yeah,
was
this
the
is
last
it.
straw for a lot of things like news media, Twitter, and stuff, because like a lot of these people hold responsibility for allowing Trump to be president in the first place. Like
And it's not
MSNBC,
just right wing
CNN.
people. Like a lot of left wing news media is responsible for Trump existing and getting so far.
Well, if like CNN, MSNBC, CBS, places like that never really aired him in the beginning, you would have had maybe Marco Rubio versus Hillary Clinton in 2016, which I don't know how that election would go because it's an election that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But they do have the responsibility uh, of Trump being president outside of the material conditions that allowed for it. Uh, and then you have like places like Twitter that allowed him just to say his views whenever he wanted. And you had this president that was addicted to social media, and it is pretty funny to watch him get his one favorite thing stripped away from him. He can't tweet
Yeah, and that
anymore.
is and that is a really weird situation to rationalize, because on one hand it's like it's weird to give private companies so much control over who has a say, but also he was fucking dangerous. His
They should have
speech,
done that years ago.
yes, no, they should have done it way sooner.
So
His speech was dangerous, and it did incite people to go out and do crazy shit.
yeah, the problem is that a lot of these people are finally denouncing Trump and separating themselves from Trump. Not only because a lot of the political capital surrounding Trump has now just disappeared, and it might even have a negative effect in 2022. But
I hope.
like for Twitter, what's Trump going to do to Twitter? He has like 11 days left as of when we're recording this, and even less when this episode comes out. Like he doesn't have enough time to do jack shit. And now the Democrats have a majority in both the House and the Senate. So these people are finally denouncing Trump when there's absolutely no consequences to denouncing Trump. Like,
Yes, yes. All the people that the night of, like, I know Ivanka was one of them, and there was another woman I think that left the cabinet
Betsy
or
DeVos
yeah,
resigned.
yeah. All like the close figures were doing these symbolic resignations and really making the whole news media about them the night of a major historical event.
Well, even with like Mitch McConnell, I think, I mean, Mitch McConnell's not a dumb guy
Mitch McConnell
politically.
jumped off earlier, I think.
He jumped off earlier, but I think he acknowledges more than any other Republican, even though he's the spawn of Satan, that Trump is kind of a car heading off a cliff in a sense. I don't know if he could have anticipated something like this, but having
Could he though? Because I feel like most lefties knew something like this was going to
something was
happen.
going to happen. I don't think anyone knew that it was going to be this bad politically for the MAGA people.
See, I kind of figured something this big was going to happen. I'm glad it had the negative effect on them. It did though, because I wasn't so sure about that.
Because what we were going to see in 2022, Trump was still going to be the leader of the Republican Party. So having him tied to what happened on Wednesday, January 6th, is going to be a big negative effect. And people like Madison Cawthorn, Ted Cruz, and all the other Matt Gaetz and such, like their campaigns are going to be hurt when Ted Cruz has to run. I don't know if this will last till 2024 when Ted Cruz has to run again. But Matt Gaetz and Vatican
I know
also
Josh
interrupts.
Hawley. I know people were talking about how Josh Hawley has a plan to go for the presidency.
Yeah, that's probably ruined at this point.
Is
But
it? Is
I
it?
mean,
No,
after
no,
yesterday,
no, no.
after a few days
Because
ago,
Charlie Kirk was like the next day tweeting about how Josh Hawley is a national hero for continuing to stand up after the insurrection. And so I do think that they have a revivable chance, especially because of these media figures that could hold them up still.
well, it matters where it goes because there's the campaign in parts. I think Isocratic shared a photo of wherever he is in Texas of a local newspaper saying that Antifa was dressed up as Trump supporters attacking the
Yeah, and
Capitol.
that was the thing that Matt Gaetz pushed when he went back in. Is Matt Gaetz was saying, "Oh, this was all Antifa. This wasn't Trump supporters. They're trying to make us look
And
bad."
then I'm not sure what Fuentes actually said because there were people on Twitter disputing this, but I think Rudy Giuliani, which is Trump's lawyer, former New York mayor, he
Man, that
quoted
jacked
Nick
off in the movie.
Fuentes. Like he quoted active neo-Nazi, America first, fascist,
Yes, and Dan
neo-Nazi.
Crenshaw today
Nick
quoted
Fuentes.
Andy No as well.
Yeah. So you have these people openly quoting fascist
And so
now.
so I was looking at, let me pull up his Twitter again. Ian Miles Chong seemed to be taking a step back from like the far right shit, and he seemed to be getting a negative response for it. And so that's why I'm not so sure that it's gonna get better and that people are really going to step away from fascism.
It really matters how much that campaign can hold because I don't really see much of it. And I don't know how many people in the center are going to believe it because a lot of this is the conspiracy brained people. It will only work on them. But it also must suck for these people that did storm the Capitol in support of Trump to just be called Antifa. Like imagine you
Yeah.
do all this stuff for Trump and then boom, they just call you Antifa communist.
Yeah. Uh I don't think that's gonna, but I think it's like it's one of those things where it's like they're gonna understand why people called them that because they kind of have to, because you have to distance yourself from that, especially if you're gonna go back on the floor and push the conspiracy theory that caused that to happen. You do kind of have to give yourself that plausible deniability of saying it was Antifa.
But you also have to look at if this was Trump supporters and these people keep pushing this conspiracy of the election being stolen. These people are tied to a like falling anvil pretty much if they cannot somehow trick the American people into believing what happened.
I don't know.
Because
It's a bit too soon to say, but I don't think like, especially since the Democrats aren't really going to change the material conditions for people, I do not think we're going to be taking many steps away from fascism.
it really matters on because you have these people in the center like my family or not my family's not really in the center but like moderate Republicans like the people in my family who did vote for Trump or my brother who's not old enough to vote for Trump but probably would have that none of them really support what happened in the Capitol and I don't think any of them can be are dumb enough to where they can be tricked to think it's Antifa communists dressed up as Trump supporters. So I do think this is just kind of people trying to cop their way out of something that is going to hurt them in 2022. Because after the election, after the 2020 election didn't go quite as well as everyone hoped, we were anticipating like 2022 was going to be like a not a good year for Democrats. It was going to be like 2010 was after the Obama win. Like a lot of the political capital going into 2022 was these people that stood up for Trump, uh, saying that they were still Trump Republicans. Like I said earlier,
Yeah.
Trump is still
Well,
going to be the
so
head.
the thing is, I saw a lot of, or sorry, I didn't see a lot. I saw a news article talking about how the cure to Trumpism is Reaganism, which is just
I mean, Trump. They're very
It,
close.
it's
I
it's
don't
a
think
primitive
there's
it's a primitive form of Trumpism. It's Trumpism without saying the racist part out loud. Um,
at least
uh,
in public.
yeah, at least in public. We all know about the phone call about the what was it, the African delegates, or that's not important right now. But they're talking about removing it from Trumpism and going back to Reaganism, which is still popular with people. And so I do think like the right-wing economic populism is going to have another burst, maybe not in 2022, but in 2024. I do think it is going to come right back around because Democrats aren't going to do anything to really change the material conditions that
It really
put Trump in
matters
power in the
because
first place.
Democrats operate on seniority, which does fuck up a lot when you get people like Feinstein in power. But Bernie is budget chairman now, as of the Georgia win. So you do have people that
Wasn't he
actually.
supposed to be labor secretary?
You don't want him as labor secretary because the Vermont governor is a Republican.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that would have been a horrible move and would mean that.
How's that work out? People re-elect Bernie, but not the.
No, the governor gets the choice, I think, for the next 2 years. Like the Democratic governor of California.
Oh, yeah. I see what you're saying. He
It
puts it
was
back in instead of having a special
yeah,
election.
and then they have an election in 2 years, which
Yeah, okay.
wins Bernie up. Bernie was up for re-election in 2018, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. So it's going to be weird because you do have people like Joe Biden, which I don't expect much out of Joe Biden nor Kamala Harris, but Bernie Sanders is in a pretty good position. I think we might be able to get a public option passed after Wednesday, actually.
Yeah, but I also see people are talking about how like Joe Manchin is more or less going to be a dino that is going to stop the more progressive wing from getting anything important through.
But you also have people are actually pushing for a Washington D.C. state because there are enough people. There's more people in Washington, I believe, than like.
Do you think that'll happen?
Wyoming.
The statehood?
It's possible. I would put it as likely as a.
I don't know about
heads.
all the stuff behind the scenes that has to happen for that to happen. I know it is a fairly popular idea, but
it'll be the first time we've had a new state in 60 to 70 years, so
yeah,
it'll definitely be weird. But once that does happen, Washington votes like 90% Democratic, so it would be a 52-40 or 52-50 Senate, which means Joe Manchin would not hold the, I guess, middle section.
Yeah. What else is on your notes to talk about today?
I mean, there was the police thing, but you see that happen. Everybody's talking about that on Twitter anywhere.
Yeah.
Like everybody, like we're not offering any new opinions on like, okay, the police just let these fucking rioters walk in.
It's what 3-4 days later that we're recording this, and it's going to be almost a week after it happened when this goes out. There's nothing important to say about what happened at the Capitol.
It's like if you don't know it, just look at how different these people treated the rioters compared to the Black Lives Matter protesters. Like, sure, like one of them died,
that, like,
but
actually, I think there is something to say about that because the fact that only one person was killed by the police, I think 5 people died in total. I
a lot of that's where it's like health risks. Like one guy,
it was
I think,
weird. One guy like tased himself. Another guy has like what, like a heart attack or something like that.
No, I don't know how many. I think one person had a stroke. Then there's that person who was 55. He tases himself in the balls and then dies of a heart attack, which it's sadistic, but I think it's ironically funny.
Yeah, only one person was killed by one of the people that were protecting the Capitol, and honestly, I don't even think she really needed to die. She was like, she was climbing up a barricade, and then there were people on the other side. They did not need to shoot her with a fucking bullet in her, like, what was it, like her chest or neck?
Probably not. But
I will say,
there was the New York Post afterwards, and they posted a story that the woman who was killed committed property damage, and Like somebody quote tweeted it and said like she was no angel, which is like obviously the joke that they or a
Yeah,
criticism
yeah.
about how they treat everyone that's shot by the cops that gets
Well,
national headlines.
the thing is, I do want to make sure we don't get too ideological with how we treat the situation. It was like she should not have been killed. I know she was breaking to the Capitol building. I know that's going to be maybe an unpopular opinion. I still don't think she should have been killed. I do think there are better ways to handle that, and I think we have proven that there are better ways to handle it in the fact that this happened and we didn't see a bunch of people that were completely brutalized.
Yeah, it does. The police's inactivity towards these rioters isn't like the antithesis of what happened over summer. It more of kind of supports it because you had those mask
Yes,
protests in the May of 2020, where absolutely the police just stood there as people with guns
yes,
just kind of like pointed it at them.
it
And
proves you do not need to go to these extents of brutalizing your citizens to control a mass movement or a riot or a
well, they
protest,
didn't
whatever you want to
control it.
call it.
They did a
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
poor job of controlling it this time. At least until the National Guard came in, which was under Mike Pence's order, not Donald Trump's. And I'm trying to be interesting. Uh, where was I going with this?
But they
Like
were
you
able
had,
to
oh, sorry.
they were able to go in and take it over without a bunch of bloodshed. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, and I think this is in the video of the girl dying, is that a bunch of police with assault rifles come up the stairs after she's laying on the ground. And do you know what they're not doing? They're not pointing their guns directly at the people. Most of them still have their guns down. They're not walking up in intimidating positions. And I think that says a lot about how we handle situations. Like you have, it was what, maybe 5 cops running into like a crowd of people with their guns down. When you look at, was it Jacob Blake where the 5 cops were following him around the car to his door?
I wouldn't know. That's
I get the names mixed up, but there was the one guy who was walking around his car and going in to get in his door, and they said he reached for a knife and they shot him 7 times. I think that was Jacob Blake.
was
The
I
fact
believe
that
so. Yeah, yeah,
but what I'm getting at is the fact that like 5 cops can roll up, not even having their assault rifles up and pointed at people, and can control the situation means it just further like
I wouldn't say
uh
that's controlling the situation at all.
maybe not, but they can get them all out without like fucking killing them, without like having a bunch of deaths. And
Well,
I
yeah,
think that's what I'm getting at is that like they do have ability to take over the situation and not let it get crazy, because like the, the fact that like there are definitely people that stormed the Capitol and definitely had weapons on them. Like there are definitely in that group of people, a bunch of MAGA people, definitely a bunch of people went in there with guns. And the fact that
yeah.
there weren't a ton of deaths, I think proves that like, man, it does not need to be, a lot of their policing doesn't need to be as violent as it is. And also a lot of people are saying like, because of the mishandling of this, like there's a whole narrative of the even liberal media was saying this. All the progressives wanted to defund the police, and the police have been going through so much stress this year, and now they have to deal with this, and
Yeah, I saw that
that's
on
why
it
they
was
didn't
on
handle
a
it.
CBS, and this is not like it's been like 3 months since there were big protests in Washington. Like they're still going on in Portland.
Well,
Portland
there were
police
the
aren't in
Proud
Washington.
Boys. There were the Proud Boys. Storming the streets of Washington, which is actually something I want to talk about. Is I want to mention this a little bit. Is the MAGA people have been slowly turning on cops lately? Like after a couple scuffles that they've had in Washington D.C., there are videos coming out of Proud Boys members like throwing their Blue Lives Matter flags on the ground and burning them, and I think really all I wanted to say about this was it proves that the Blue Lives Matter and the All Lives Matter movements were never about what they meant. It was all just racism,
Oh yeah,
because
yeah, definitely.
as soon as the cops started turning on the good people, is how I'd assume they'd see it in their eyes. You know, they instantly were turning against them, burning their flags in the streets, and kind of co-opting the language, because that was another thing that they did after Ashley Babbitt died. That was the woman that was shot in the Capitol. Is there were people going on Twitter being like, say her name, and, you know.
Yeah, it because you have there's Back the Blue, but there's also Blue Lives Matter, which is like co-opting of left wing language, if you want to call Black Lives Matter left wing language.
It
So
shouldn't be, but I think it kind of is.
I mean, yeah, I mean, Black Lives Matter, as it is like the physical organization, is typically a Marxist one. Uh,
Yeah,
because there's
the
the class
organization is,
analysis.
but like the idea of it should not be as partisan as it is. It's ridiculous that it is so fucking left versus
Then,
right with that.
like towards the end, I don't want this to be an excessively long episode because I do think, at least I'm less interesting without a guest on. Uh,
I think we talked about most of the stuff that I want to talk about today. I think there's a lot of. I don't think we necessarily know where this is going quite yet.
yeah, because it is, like I say a lot of things about like Republicans still being attached on 2022, but you have no idea what the propaganda can really do in 2 years or a year and a
Yeah,
half.
it really does depend on where the propaganda goes, and it does depend on whether there is a charming figure to take Trump's place that is like charismatic to right wing people.
Because McConnell, I think, like I said earlier, he wants to separate the party from Trump as much as possible because he does Trump is a car running off a cliff. And if you are not a devoted MAGA person, which I mean, you've seen online that even the MAGA people are turning on Trump because Trump had to somewhat denounce the insurrection. They're
Yeah,
like, fuck
it
Trump.
is
He's
this like big multifaceted mess. You have like the right wing sickos that are denouncing Trump because Trump backed off, and then you have the more mainstream party that is denouncing Trump because he went too crazy.
yeah.
But I think we're failing to denounce the people that also supported this conspiracy and that are still just gonna go scot free
Yeah,
away from this.
that's a problem with. I wanted to talk about populism again, like we did in the uh, what is it, fifth episode with or sixth episode with Mouthy, infidel. But I do kind of see that there's two types of populism, not just left and right, like but like the strategy behind it and the inherent philosophy behind it. In simple terms, because it populism in itself is inherently us versus them, but that's not necessarily bad because you can have the us versus them of like proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, as in like Marxism, or the 99% versus the 1%, which is the way that Bernie Sanders explains it. But you can also have the if you're not with me, then you're against me populism that you're going to see with the MAGA people. And you also have with Jimmy Dore, Breanna Greyjoy, and people like that. And that becomes extremely toxic very quickly
See that, and
because
that is the biggest problem I think the left faces right now is how do we unify? Because there's a lot of people on the left that I don't even want to unify it with, with the you're with me or against me
but
ideals.
those like people aren't really against us. They're just working for us in a different way. And I don't think a lot of people realize that because, or a lot of people like Jimmy Dore don't realize that it was because like, even though like I might not want what socialism done left or Mouthy Infidel wants one for one, we all kind of see capitalism as the enemy, at least in the long term. Maybe we see Republicans as a bigger enemy, which they are in the short term. But just because we have different ways of thinking, different strategies of how to get there, and different end goals, doesn't mean that I should treat them as my enemy. They are not the them, they are still the us because we have a common goal of at least a little bit of socialism. Because a social democrat's better than a neoliberal, and a neoliberal is better than a normal Republican, as the way I'd put it.
Yeah,
Because yeah, you have to know when the team. You can't purity test when you're not in communism yet.
when you're not like also when the current Overton window is so far right, you
Yeah,
can't really.
or at
Yeah,
least on like economic issues, it does see because the reason some people perceive it going right and some people see it going left is because I think people are focusing on different things. socially, we are moving left. That is a good thing. I'm not going to denounce that at all. Like gay rights, like the right to marry in all 50 states, and including our own, is only 5 or 6 years old now. That seems like, ooh, I can't imagine how long ago that feels, honestly. Like Obergefell v. Hodges, which is the court case that did that, it just feels part of the consciousness now. It's not something I can disagree with, but there's still people that are against
Yeah,
it. Like
it's
trans
recent
rights are
enough that people
becoming.
are still trying to overturn it.
I don't know how many people are really trying to overturn it, because it is like you'll get
Well,
canceled if you don't bake a cake for gay people now.
well, it was one of the main, like, not one of the main things. It was a part of the GOP's agenda if they had won in
Well,
2020.
yeah, the GOP is still against LGBTQ rights. It's in their agenda for 2020, officially at least. So you do have people like the Republicans. I don't think on their own, like they could in 2016, they could only ignore it at that point, which was better than outright denouncing it. But I don't think now a lot of people in the GOP, the Republican Party, can denounce LGBTQ rights like they could a few years ago. Like you might still be able to get a
I don't know.
something out of the
They're still
lesbian
pretty
or
anti-trans.
yeah, anti-trans. I think is the
Like
only
they're
part they can get
softer
out
on
of
the
it.
anti-homosexuality. Like Ben Shapiro is still fairly openly homophobic,
Yeah,
but he's I guess like softer on it than you could be, honestly, even like 5 years ago, even
yeah,
as soon
because
as
they've
then.
had to take their steps back. But like economically, with all the tax breaks rich people are getting, we have moved economically to more the right wing ideas than the social democracy, if you could even call it that, or like some Keynesian policies that you would see under FDR, uh,
Well, I also don't think we've moved
LBJ.
to the left on all social issues. I mean, we're still really far right when it comes to like tough on crime shit with like still enforcing the death penalty and still.
I do think that's waned a lot, and a lot of the reason you see that is because you still have those people in power. I think tough on crime has kind of morphed into the back the blue kind of deal, because they are both like anti-black ways of thinking, I guess, or anti-poverty, anti-minority, because you know because of their material conditions, people in poverty normally do more crime, and therefore they're more likely to get arrested and make it harder to escape poverty. But oh, there's a lot of silent parts I'm gonna have to cut out this episode.
See, even like speaking about like poverty and stuff, you still have people on the left because of we're so economically to the right that like the mainstream Democrats are still pushing the idea like the meritocracy and stuff that has us pulled so far right.
Yeah, I do think that's the problem. We are economically right, but I mean that's just my take. I think we've moved left socially and right economically, but it even like the programs of like Lyndon B. Johnson kind of seem not possible right now, at least in the next 2 years or so. You might get a couple, and then having a new deal is unimaginable for a couple more years.
It's kind of what we need, but yeah, no, it's not happening.
Yeah, I want the economic bill of rights that FDR proposed, but for all races, because if you look back, a lot of the problems on the left back then, especially like L or not L, FDR, William Jennings Bryan, people like that, they were also kind of racist. I think that the things that led to redlining were under the New Deal acts, because you had the people that were giving out home loans, and then they rated them 1, 2, 3, and 4, where 1 was the most trustworthy, I believe, and then 4 was like your Italians, which were associated with like a gang culture, and then African Americans, which separated them from being able to accumulate capital.
Yeah, and I think that is the biggest problem is like, especially the biggest economic problem we have is like especially minority groups did not really have a long time to accrue capital. Like the way I see it for Black people, it seems like they only had from 1965 was it, to essentially 1980 to accrue capital.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Because a lot of it before that was absolutely destroyed. And I don't want to really speak on this a lot because I am like a white guy, middle class, upper
Yeah.
middle class. Like I don't really know the struggles that these people can face. So I don't really want to talk about this too long before without a guest that better understands those issues than we do. So I do want to talk about one thing before we go. One last topic, I think. I don't want this to be too long of an episode. But I did want to. I tweeted about it on the official Twitter account, which guys should go follow if you aren't already. But like the Electoral College's role in this, even though it's a 200-year-old kind of election process, but I do think a factor in allowing the Stop the Steal to grow as a, I guess, conspiracy was that this election, which was won by 7 million votes, come down to a few tens of thousands of votes scattered in different states, like Minnesota. Was it Minnesota?
It was Oh wait, which ones like turned the?
Nevada, Georgia.
Nevada, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin.
Yeah, Wisconsin, not Minnesota. Minnesota's a stronghold, well, at least a little bit.
Arizona too was one of the ones.
Those five
Arizona
states,
was solved in like first week though.
Those 5 states that came close gave an election that was just won outright. Like this is a big margin of victory, electoral college wise and popular vote wise. Like we're looking like maybe like 5%, 5 to 10% difference in voter numbers for each of them, which is statistically significant, I guess, if that's the right term, which it probably isn't. But to have this large division between Trump and Biden, even though they both hold the spots for 1 and 2 of most votes in history, have it come down to such close margins in a few states is kind of problematic. I do think this could serve as a case to get rid of the Electoral College.
I think the case for getting rid of the Electoral College just seems to make itself over and over again as time goes on, but I don't know if we'll ever act on it.
I think we might. If it's going to happen, I think maybe 20 years. I'm going to put 20 years on it. Hold me to account when I'm 39. If the Electoral College isn't gone, sue me, I guess, for $50. No more. I probably won't have that much more money.
No, we're not going to have shit.
Yeah, I'm a podcaster. I don't even have
the economic crisis is going to keep going on, and
yeah, let's end this on a lighter note. My prediction for the future is that we all are podcasters and we all subscribe to each other's Patreons so that we all
mutual aid, but through podcasting.
Yeah. You give me $5, I give you $5. We all get the money at the same time. That's definitely how economics works.
Dude, that reminds me like those videos on TikTok about like you put in $20, I put in $10, we both leave with $30.
What?
Dude, I don't fucking know. It's some goofy shit.
Yeah, what was it? It's technically a pyramid scheme, but they reshaped it as an oval. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, the circle game where like you get 8 people to give you $100, and then like each of those 8 people become their own circle where they get 8 people to give them $100, and like everyone gets $800.
Let me do my calculations on how long that takes to become the total population of Earth. So I'll set my calculator. Let's end this episode on a fun note. So you have your one person in the middle. You can see that. And then I'll just take that out. But you have your 8. And then you times that by 8. So you have 64 by the 3rd ring. You times that by 8 again.
Rings, yeah.
By the 4th ring, you have 512 people included. By the 8th ring, you have 2 million people included. Let's see how long it takes to get to the world population.
Do you think there's any of these that actually went that far? Because like
absolutely not. I think it's within like maybe 13 to 15. You would have to have the entire world population included to where it would even be possible to keep going. Or because if you guys are probably not familiar as we are, because like someone that we're friends with was doing this.
Yeah, so the scheme is like you're a guy in the middle of the circle, and you get a bunch of people to give you $100, and then they like create their own circle or some shit.
No,
Or no,
no.
there's two levels to the circle. There's you get 4 people, and those 4 people each get 2 people each, or something like that.
No, so there's the person in the middle. They can get as many people as they want, maybe. But then on the second level, you can join in on the circle, I guess. I don't know how it works. It's so weird. Maybe you get free advertisement to your circle because you're attached with everyone else. I don't know.
Here's what it is. No, you have the person in the middle, and then there's 2 people on the next layer, and then there's 4 people on the next layer, and then there's 8 people on the outside layer that all pay $100 to the person in the middle. And then when those people on the outside pay $100 to the person in the middle, it splits off into 2 circles from the people in the second layer.
That
And then
makes absolutely no sense.
All the people on the outside, on the furthest outside, so like the third ring, and then like the fourth ring is the one spending money. The third ring is the third ring is the people that find the people to give them money to the center person. And then
so the center person
do it.
And the second tier make a profit. The
center person makes the profit, and then the second person has to get the second tier. I don't know, dude. Look up circle game money on Google. It'll fucking come up. It's such a ridiculous thing, but like apparently it worked for one of the people we know.
Yeah, the person we know that did it was like on the second ring, so they made a profit. They made their $800 or $1,000 or how for
whatever it was.
Do not participate in this. If you can just put your your hands like this, and then just put it over the picture. If you're listening on Spotify, I'm making a triangle with my hands.
Cam, you're confirming you're in the Illuminati right now.
Yeah, I am in the Illuminati. Leftology is a George Soros podcast. This is why we're not funny until the end of the episode. George Soros is the only one that listens to this entire episode. Please comment. I did this in the 4th episode, but please comment below in the comments if you are George Soros or you agree with his plan on world domination.
See, I think we weren't funny this whole time because I was like, honestly, dude, going into this podcast, I was like a really doomer about like where we're going from this, because I don't see fascism going away. And that's my big doomer take.
I'm really sorry that we can't be funny until the end of the episode, listeners.
We
need to develop personalities.
Sorry to all one person listening to this part.
Look, we get more than that. Okay. The 5 devices I watched this on to get more interactions with this YouTube video will have all seen this clip.
How did they make it to the end?
They all do, because
all your devices?
I don't pause them until the end. Look,
all
man,
right,
I'm trying to get my interactions. If YouTube watches this and it's like, oh, you're doing illegal activity, I'll do my 1 second in jail.
All right. Well, I think that's it for today.
That's it. We'll see you
2 weeks from now.
2 to 3 weeks, maybe even 4.
Hopefully
go watch
2
all
weeks
of our
from
old
now.
content.
Hopefully 2 weeks from now.
Go watch the new Mouthy Infidel and Socialism Done Left podcast.
Oh yeah.
Is it evidence-based leftism?
Yeah,
I think
fact-based leftism.
I think it's evidence-based leftism. And I think they have a different part of the episode on each of their YouTube accounts, which is linked in the last 2 episodes.
Yeah, I'm excited to go listen to that because I haven't gotten the chance to yet.
I haven't either. I'll listen to it later. It's on both of their channels because there's not a channel for that yet.
Yeah.
But everybody, have a good week. Try not to focus too much on if democracy goes away or not.
Yeah, don't doomer post like I have.
Thank you for listening. Leave a subscribe, leave a like.
Leave a subscribe.
Thank you for watching. I really don't know how to end episodes. I'm really bad at this. Have a good week.